Welcome to my video on weekly lesson planning. This is intended for teachers and it aims to talk you and by proxy myself through the kind of planning that I want to do for the students, so what they're going to see, myself as a teacher and any outside observers, be they Ofsted or even a colleague. Let us presume that you already have some work created by your students and you're interested in experimenting with this style of criteria-based planning. Whilst the overlay of this screen at this part of the video may look rather garish to you, it does serve a purpose. Each of the green boxes refers to a particular action that you're going to want to take. Each of the blue boxes refers to a consideration that will influence the actions that you're going to take. As with any learning cycle, you need to start with the scheme of work, which is of course over here. The scheme of work is influenced by the national curriculum. The national curriculum should be taken into account, but only at the level of the medium-term and the long-term plan. It isn't something that you want to refer to on a lesson-by-lesson basis, or even, I think, on a weekly basis. Yes, for students in the PGCE, it's useful, but for classroom teachers who are qualified, no, it is not. I also refer to this term of class personality. The class personality is the aptitude and attitude of your students, and it refers to how you're going to approach and what you're going to take from the scheme of work that you have created previously. From this scheme of work, you're going to aim to mark work produced already by the students. I think that you should be marking about 25% of the work formatively. The rest of it should be marked peer assessment, self-assessment, and all the other techniques used in that. This should be forming part of your mark book. Look elsewhere on my website for information about how I do that. And this then leads to you aiming to create a rubric to focus the work for either that week or over a short period of time. As well as creating that rubric, which is based on the criteria, you're going to want to make it relevant. By that I mean that you're going to make other things that are outside of the criteria of the exams, the requirements of skills and knowledge, and you're going to make the work interesting and relevant to the students as you deem necessary. The rubric itself can be based upon the APP, the criteria of the exam board in which you are approaching, especially of course for Key Stage 4, and of course your own understanding and experiences as a teacher. All of these things will influence how you create the rubric. And of course, that esoteric factor, the personality of the class. For me, at this stage of play, the lesson timings need to be considered as well. The lesson timings ensure that enough time is given for, I think, the plenary and also to ensure a rapid start to the lesson. Differentiation also occurs in your thinking at this time, and the two broad aspects of differentiation are either by outcome or by task. Differentiation by task is trickier and certainly more arduous. However, if you're intending to model work for the students, that can involve creating some differentiation as well. Even just the principle of completing certain tasks prior to the students doing so can allow you to create differentiation by task. Differentiation by outcome is the most common way of differentiating. It shouldn't just be the case of differentiating by the amount of work produced, such as analysing a certain number of lines and the better students analysing more lines. It should involve the outcome being specifically different work. And again, it's essential to have a rigorous rubric to allow you to do so. Ultimately, the differentiation in your thinking at this time should aim to ensure that all students can access the lesson. I've heard EAL tutors who are employed by the LEA suggesting that even if a student can access 5 or 10 minutes of a lesson, that is enough when they first enter the country. It's up to you as a teacher to decide how much you want to give. From that rubric, it's up to you to create the components for the lessons ahead. These components in this box are all distinguished because they are the ones that are going to be shared with the students. The extent to which you want to create these components is of course up to yourself. With learning objectives, the past 2 years, and praised somewhat by Ofsted and others, I have been using some interactive tasks with the learning objectives. That is things like the word magnet by Triptycho, generic words where students are required to define aspects of the learning objective, or rearranging words in particular ways. At the moment, I'm using Christian Still's way of using learning objectives. What that is starting off with a cognitive verb stem based on Bloom's taxonomy, and again, that is shared with the students, the content of the work, and then if the students are applying or using any previous knowledge. So those links are made explicit for the students. Of course, the tasks need to be shared with the students, either via modelling or by the worksheets given to them. The homeworks are created and shared to the students as well. And for me, I think homework should be set at the beginning of the lesson and ideally at the same time each week. That is something I profoundly believe in. Homework should not be a bolt-on, and if homework is a bolt-on, then I think that it should be either missed out for that week or it should require the students to do some personalised learning homework. Finally, I think making explicit an entrance and plenary tasks for the students is very useful. I would say that 90% of my plenary tasks are your straightforward pyramid plenaries. They are massively useful. They allow dialogue when you mark with the students in their books. Every once in a while, though, I will do a plenary that is, for the want of a better word, engaging, or allows them to approach something in a new way, or to make links in different ways. Again, this is also for my own enjoyment and my own rhythms of learning and teaching as much as the students. As I said before, all of these tasks will be on a PowerPoint or something where the students can refer to at the start and during the lesson. As part of your planning, these 3 blue boxes are considerations that you need to think about for each of your tasks or each of your lessons. I am far less recording what I'm going to do in the lesson, because what happens in the actual management of the tasks, whilst carefully planned in my head, is very difficult to record on paper. One thing that I think does need to be recorded is when I will, or how I will intend to mark each task. As I said before, I think 25% is a useful ballpark figure to aim for in giving students formative feedback. It's no good giving them formative feedback if they're not actually going to respond to that feedback. So 25% I think is a useful number. The most important consideration out of all of these is, I think, the focus for the lesson. As Trevor Wright says, it's essential to avoid that aspect of teaching, especially in English teaching, where the teacher merely goes through everything in a poem, for example. So a teacher might go through onomatopoeia, alliteration, metaphor, imagery, rhyme, rhythm, assonance, any kind of antithesis that is present throughout the poem. And the students might remember 2 or 3 of these in some level of detail. Far better is to, of course, refer to these aspects of the poem, but to make sure that the students' learning is focused upon particular parts. And that, say, if the students are learning 10 poems over 10 lessons or something similar, that by the end of that, rather than covering everything in every lesson, they focus on particular things each lesson. Of course, for the rhythm of teaching and learning, that is something that needs to change and to be considered. But for me, making sure the focus is explicit is useful. Finally, making clear what resources are needed is something I think needs to be decided at this time. When you have a large digital store of resources, this can even be linked to. During the lessons themselves, the students need to have specific time to respond to feedback. I think the best schools make this practice uniform across the whole school. Students responding to feedback then I think needs to go into their learning diary. The learning diary should not be arduous and it need not be particularly detailed. It is simply a form, which I will show you later on my website, where the students are able to articulate precisely their targets, how they have responded to them, any links from those targets, and any kind of progress they may or may not have made. Again, if the rubric that was created before is rigorous, differentiation is inherent within this. Students can of course achieve outside the remit of the rubrics, and as I said before, such links to aspects of learning outside of those rubrics, it needs to be made explicit, either by the teacher or by the students. The rubrics as a structure are not intended to constrain. They are not intended to close down the lesson to one or two particular points. Instead, rather, they are a structure as a bike is a structure, that by using the rubrics, more can be achieved in a more enjoyable and a more focused sense. Finally, from the work in the lesson, this leads you back to the marking that you do yourself. The marking that you do yourself needs to be recorded accurately and easily. It's important that you have a life yourself when you do all of this. Absolutely essential. For me, rubric marking involves you recording into your mark book a number based on a previous rubric. As you can see elsewhere, I have comment boxes with the rubric criteria specified for each week. And that allows me to see patterns in my students that then inform future planning. Ultimately, with all of these things, with all the feedback you give and all the marking you give and the way that you use the mark book, all of it needs to be useful to you and it needs to help to improve learning. At any point in any of these lessons and in any of this planning, you need to have opportunities to be impromptu. So, for example, last Friday, period 5, my students in year 9, after completing several tasks, had a story time where we pushed back the tables to the edge of the room. They chose to sit on the carpet and one of our students read a story which we then analysed and interrogated. This was not planned for, but it was appropriate at the time. And the fact that I had something else planned meant for me it was being done for a purpose. It wasn't just being done because nothing else could be thought of. It wasn't just being done because it was something to do. For me, it had a purpose, that the students were interested, excited, and applying their analytical skills to stories that they had written themselves. Thank you.